this is part 2 of Lamb to the Slaughter. Now, last time we stopped considering the text right after Mary Maloney's husband had revealed to her something extremely important. We don't know exactly which word he used. We are only given an account of the last words, which are these ones. He goes, "There it is," he added, "and I know it's kind of a bad time to be telling you, but there simply wasn't any other way. Of course, I will give you money, and I'll see you looked after, but there needn't really be any fuss. I hope not, anyway. It wouldn't be good. It wouldn't be very good for my job." Now, again, there is a note of chauvinism here. The man works, the woman, looks after the house, looks after the children. What the woman does is not as important as what the man does. So, his job comes first. Again, this is another stereotype that we find here. But let's go on reading. Her first instinct was not to believe any of it, to reject it all. It occurred to her that perhaps he hadn't even spoken, that she herself had imagined the whole thing. Maybe if she went about her business and acted as though she hadn't been listening, then later, when she sort of woke up again, she might find none of it had ever happened. "I'll get the supper," she managed to whisper, and this time he didn't stop her. Then she walked across the room. She couldn't feel her feet touching the floor. She couldn't feel anything at all, except a slight nausea and a desire to vomit. Everything was automatic now. Down the steps to the cellar, the light switch, the deep freeze, the hand inside the cabinet, taking hold of the first object it met. She lifted it out and looked at it. It was wrapped in paper, so she took off the paper and looked at it again. A leg of lamb. All right then, they would have lamb for supper. She carried it upstairs, holding the thin bone end of it with both her hands, and as she went through the living room, she saw him standing over by the window with his back to her, and she stopped. Okay, so we see this woman, her, her reaction is the reaction a person has when something is totally unexpected and something is really, really, it's just too much to be taken. She cannot, in a way, she cannot sort of digest. She cannot process what has happened to her. It's such a blow that the first reaction she's got is a reaction of total rejection. It's, as Freud put it, a defense mechanism. The first defense and the most primitive defense mechanism is that of refusal. Basically, it's not true. But back in the mind, something happens, and she's, as it were, devoid of will. So she's acting as a robot. She is not feeling anything. She's kind of numb. A similar reaction happens to children when they are beaten up by their parents. Small children, at the beginning they feel pain, but when they get beaten up so violently, they stop feeling pain. Their body defends itself from the blows that come from their parents, and they become sort of numb. It's the same kind of reaction, and here the author shows a lot of sensitivity towards the feelings of this poor woman. She's pregnant. She was waiting for her husband. She was deeply in love with him. She was secure. She was confident that their relationship was a solid one. And then, her husband's account comes totally unexpected. Um, okay, as you said, as we read, everything was automatic now. You see the way the narration proceeds down the steps to the cellar, the light switch, the deep freeze, the hand inside the cabinet taking hold of the first object it met. Okay, she is acting as if she were sort of controlled remotely by an external entity. Okay, and we do see this. Then let's carry on reading, because now we're going to have a surprise. Okay, so here we were. She carried it upstairs, holding the thin bone end of it with both her hands. And as she went through the living room, she saw him standing over by the window with his back to her, and she stopped. "For God's sake," he said, hearing her, but not turning round. "Don't make supper for me. I'm going out." Okay. At that point, Mary Maloney simply walked up behind him, and without any pause, she swung the big frozen leg of lamb high in the air and brought it down as hard as she could on the back of his head. She might just as well have hit him with a steel club. She stepped back a pace, waiting. And the funny thing was that he remained standing there for at least 4 or 5 seconds, gently swaying. Then he crashed to the carpet. The violence of the crash, the noise, the small table overturning, helped her bring her out of the shock. She came out slowly, feeling cold and surprised. And she stood for a while, blinking at the body, still holding the ridiculous piece of meat tight with both hands. "All right," she told herself. "So I've killed him." Now, uh, it's a total incident. It's nothing planned. She kills her husband unexpectedly, but the first person to be surprised is Mary Maloney herself. What triggered her action was the fact that her husband told her, "Don't make supper for me, I'm going out." Then she suddenly realized that what had happened before, what he had told her before, was reality. She hadn't dreamt about it. She heard it for sure. And her reaction is a very instinctual reaction, is in spite of her will, in spite of her love, that she kills him. And she kills him without really even wanting to kill him, really. She doesn't realize she's doing it. But then what happens later is again another masterpiece of understanding human psychology. It was extraordinary now how clear her mind became all of a sudden. She began thinking very fast. As the wife of a detective, she knew quite well what the penalty would be. That was fine. It made no difference to her. In fact, it would be a relief. On the other hand, what about the child? What were the laws about murderers with unborn children? Did they kill them both, mother and child? Or did they wait until the 10th month? What did they do? Mary Maloney didn't know, and she certainly wasn't prepared to take a chance. She carried the meat into the kitchen, placed it in a pan, turned the oven on high, and shoved it inside. Then she washed her hands, and she ran upstairs to the bedroom. She sat down before the mirror, tidied her hair, touched up her lobs and face, her lips. Sorry, here there's a mistake. Touched up her lips and where am I? I've lost. Touched up her lips here. Okay, and face. She tried a smile. It came out rather peculiar. She tried again. "Hello, Sam," she said brightly, aloud. The voice sounded peculiar, too. "I want some potatoes, please, Sam." "Yes, and I think a can of peas." That was better. Both the smile and the voice were coming out better now. She rehearsed it several times more. Then she ran downstairs, took her coat, went out the back door, down the garden, into the street. It wasn't 6 o'clock yet, and the lights were still on in the grocery shop. "Hello, Sam," she said brightly, smiling at the man behind the counter. "Why, good evening, Mrs. Maloney. How are you?" "I want some potatoes, please, Sam." "Yes, and I think a can of peas." The man turned and reached up behind him on the shelf for the peas. "Patrick's decided he's tired and he doesn't want he doesn't want to eat out tonight," she told him. "We usually go out Thursdays, and now he's caught me without any vegetables in the house." "Then how about meat, Mrs. Maloney?" "No, I've got meat, thanks. I've got a nice leg of lamb from the freezer." "Oh, I don't know much like cooking it frozen, Sam, but I'm taking a chance on it this time. You think it'll be all right?" "Personally," the grocer said, "I don't believe it makes any difference." "You want this Idaho potatoes?" "Oh, yes, that'll be fine. 2 of those. Anything else?" The grocer cocked his head on one side, looking at her pleasantly. "How about afterwards? What are you going to give him for afterwards?" "Well, what would you suggest, Sam?" The man glanced around his shop. "How about a nice big slice of cheesecake? I know he likes that." "Perfect," she said. "He loves it." And when it was all wrapped and she had paid, she put on her brightest smile and said, "Thank you, Sam. Good night." "Good night, Mrs. Maloney, and thank you." And now, she told herself, as she hurried back, all she was doing now, she was returning home to her husband, and he was waiting for her supper, and she must cook it good and make it as tasty as possible, because the poor man was tired. And if, when she entered the house, she happened to find anything unusual or tragic or terrible, then naturally it would be a shock, and she'd become frantic with grief and horror. Mind you, she wasn't expecting to find anything. She was just going home with the vegetables. Mrs. Patrick Maloney going home with the vegetables on Thursday evening to cook supper for her husband. That's the way, she told herself. Do everything right and natural. Keep things absolutely natural, and there'll be no need for any acting at all. Therefore, when she entered the kitchen by the back door, she was humming a little tune to herself and smiling. "Patrick," she called, "how are you, darling?" She put the parcel down on the table and went through into the living room. And when she saw him lying there on the floor with his legs doubled up and one arm twisted back underneath his body, it really was rather a shock. All the old love and longing for him welled up inside her, and she ran over to him. She knelt down beside him and began to cry her heart out.